guys. So the topic today is partnerships, and it's obviously a very important topic in the world of technology for technology companies that are driving innovation, that are growing rapidly, and obviously partnerships historically have been an important source of fuel to make that magic happen, both for larger companies in technology and of course for startups that are driving a lot of that innovation. And what better way to think about partnerships in the many dimensions than the three that we have represented here. My own perspective as an investor, Kirt's perspective is a startup that's driving, formerly a startup and now still was a private company that's driving innovation in the Android ecosystem. And Peggy Johnson, who's the chief deal maker at Microsoft, a company that's obviously been driving innovation for decades in numerous areas of technology. So with that as the background on you all, would love to hear the story of your partnership that began or was announced first in April, that is really a sign of what can be achieved and what has been recently been hailed as a very interesting partnership that is exciting for consumers and the ecosystem broadly. So Peggy, if you can start and just tell us a little bit about the partnership and what inspired you to begin, having those conversations, and over time, what we as consumers can expect to hear about it.
Thanks, Mood. So the partnership with Cyanogen, we kind of think of partnerships as being about innovation, and actually partnerships can be quite disruptive. And so when we first looked at what Cyanogen was doing, broadening the Android ecosystem, we saw that as a path to take our services to a broader market as well. So our Office applications, Bing, OneNote, OneDrive, we have now, working with Kirt, we can tap into the ecosystem that he's building. So it worked out very well for us. We saw it as another path to bring our product to the public.
And Kirt, from your perspective?
We obviously do our own version of Android, and we saw that Microsoft had a lot of really great services, and we felt that they would obviously be a great partner in enabling us to do things that, as a startup, it's really hard to do on your own. I think there are times when you creating opportunity that, as a smaller company, it's always good to be aligned with a larger company that has some benefits and can allow you to get greater traction and greater scale quicker in the market.
Excellent. So again, from a perspective of an investor, one of the popular adages that you hear in investing, particularly around startups, is that partnerships are bullshit. You try to tell startups this because in their formative phases, it can often be out of sequence to think about achieving growth in the magic of product market fit via partnership rather than through more organic means, through your own product development. So Kirt, you first. If there is any truth to that statement that partnerships are bullshit for startups, at what phase in the life cycle of a startup evolving do partnerships become less bullshit and actually become something that's a really meaningful driver of durability and competitive advantage?
I think that Series A seed, if you're trying to figure out product market fit, a big partnership, it can usually take a lot of time. A lot of time to negotiate, et cetera. So at that stage, it might be a little more challenging. I think when you have product market fit, users, you're attempting to scale, there are partners that are going to make sense. In this case, we felt like Microsoft was a really awesome partner for us.
Was there a point in time where you achieved that inflection point in your life cycle where it started to make sense?
Cyanogen is sort of a unique case. We already had, before our A round of financing, we were already the largest Android open source community in the world. We already were flashed on millions of devices, et cetera. So we had pretty clear ideas in regard to how we were going to take it to the next level. And one of the companies on our radar, amongst others, was obviously Microsoft. So it wasn't long after starting the company that we started to have a dialogue. And we have a bunch of people in Seattle as well, so they're in our backyard, so it makes it a lot easier.
So Peggy, when you think about the life cycle of a partnership, from strategy to negotiation to execution, the negotiating side of it, what are some of the best practices? So, on the one hand, the sort of trade-offs in transparency versus the risks associated with that, is win-win really achievable? Or should you think about sort of compromise along the way being actually the way to make a partnership happen from a negotiating perspective?
Well, really, partnerships, by definition, mean you're not fully in control. So you have to go into it accepting that. But for me, I always try to put myself in this case, Kirt's shoes, and really listen to what he's trying to do, and then say, what am I trying to do? And if we can find that synergy in between, then you can base it on a partnership. So it's not just about partnering and a business transaction. That's just a commercial agreement. It's really about getting to the partnership stage where it's mutually beneficial, but realizing each of us has to give up a little bit. So we can't completely control the situation, but we can bring value for our joint customers. So we have joint customers. If we can do a deep integration together and bring more value to them, it's going to be good for both of us. So you have to give up a little bit to bring more value.
And Kirt, you are on the opposing side of that in this particular opportunity with Microsoft. As a smaller company, when you're negotiating with a much larger business, significantly larger in this case, which I think is the dynamic that startups mostly face when they're thinking about partnerships. I mean, rarely do you have two smaller companies partnering together. That almost seems dysfunctional. Are there certain dynamics involved that create like a David and Goliath feeling? And if so, is that always to the detriment of a startup? How should they think about that so that they're not at a disadvantage resource-wise, whether it's financial, whether it's legal or anything else?
I think it's important to have some kind of leverage when going into these things, right? In our case, we had something I think Microsoft was really interested in, which was a unique strategy towards creating distribution in the Android ecosystem. That helps. Going in without a clear understanding of what the partner's needs may be, I think then you may have some challenges. I think that if you're offering something unique and you have a clear understanding, it'll definitely give you some more leverage. Yeah.
And Peggy, do you feel like there is really that leverage imbalance in most cases that larger companies have? And if so, is there any advice that you would give startups when they're entering that situation? This may be the very first time they've ever negotiated a partnership, whereas companies like Google, Microsoft, many others have done this countless times before. How should they think about that?
Well, probably the best advice for startups is to stay focused. To stay focused and have a very clear roadmap. And that's what we saw in Cyanogen. But when we talk about the David and Goliath, for sure we have a different balance sheet. And so that puts us in a different category. But we bring a lot of value to startups. We have a global partner network. We've been in business for 40 years, so we can tap into that. We have a great facility in Microsoft called Microsoft Research, and we do a lot of basic research. We spend quite a bit in R&D in that area. We can open that up to the partners and the startup community. But I think what startups have and that they can leverage is they have a different perspective on the industry. They have eyes and ears at a different level than we do. So we can miss a few things that a startup can see just because they may be looking in at the industry from a different perspective. And so they should leverage that. A company like Microsoft may not have that same perspective. And so that's something they can certainly bring to the table.
Now, pulling on that same thread, a lot of what inspires a partnership, or certainly the impetus behind it, particularly with a startup versus a much larger company that's been around a long time, is disruption. And when you think about that and the synergies that are created because of that, it's most often situations where competition already exists or competition might happen in the future. That's the basis of why there are synergies. But that's also why there's risk in negotiating these things with today's competitor or a future competitor. How do you think about forging a partnership in a situation that can potentially become competitive? You first, Kirt.
Forging a partnership in a situation that can become competitive, like
That might become competitive. Yeah.
you know, I don't think that we are thinking particularly about that when we go into a negotiation, when we look at a partnership. I think based on the nature of what we're doing anyway, we already realize we have really big competitors as it currently exists. So anything that can help us move the needle, I'm less concerned about how that partner could become competitive at some point. I think that our focus is on creating value with the partnership before worrying about the competitive nature of the partnership down the road. You know, don't get me wrong. I mean, we think about these things, right? What would partner X, you know, what would we do if partner X did Y? But it's not something we're actively planning against.
And Microsoft has obviously so many initiatives underway, it must be virtually impossible to not think is potentially competitive any company that's relevant. So are there certain lines that you try not to cross, or how do you enter those situations so that you don't violate things that may be sacrosanct?
Well, for sure, because we interact with so many companies, there are points of competition, that's for sure. In fact, two partnerships we have, there are areas of competition. Salesforce, so we have a CRM product, as does Salesforce, but we've found areas of collaboration that allowed us, for both of us, to expand our total addressable market. So we came together in those areas, and we were respectful about the areas of competition, but we found so much value coming together. Same with Dropbox. We announced our partnership with Dropbox here last year, and we have OneDrive, but a lot of our customers use Dropbox and Microsoft, and if we can integrate those things and bring them a better solution, it's kind of good for both of us, being respectful about each of our separate areas of competition.
And again, we talked about the life cycle, strategy, negotiating, and execution. On the execution side of it, how do you think about measuring the success of a partnership? From the beginning, is it important to have sort of a structured scorecard? And you know, if you view these partnerships as being organic things that evolve over time and change over time, what's the right way to change that scorecard and adapt so that you're constantly course correcting and making sure that the partnership lives and breathes along with the people that are a part of them? Peggy, you first.
So a good example of that was our relationship with Acompli. And they do a fantastic app for Outlook on iOS and Android. Two areas where our customers are. So in our quest to meet our customers where they are, we struck up a relationship with Acompli. We, at some point, decided we want that magic that they've built in that app to be part of our Outlook portfolio. And we ended up going from partnership to acquisition. So there was one where we were on a path to partnership, but at some point it made sense for acquisition. And then when we acquired Acompli, we very quickly integrated into our existing portfolio and got the product back out the door in just a couple of months. So it's all about, you know, not taking too much time, but the speed of execution and meeting your objectives as quickly as possible. Got that back out the door, but probably the best part was the CEO, Javier Soltero, who we brought on, and really changed the culture inside of our existing Outlook team, because he brought just sort of a different dynamic and a different way to pursue that market, and he's now head of all of Outlook for Microsoft. And so it was a great collaboration, a good execution, and a great final product in both the people as well as the app on the handsets.
And have those dynamics changed over time, even in the less than a year? I guess it's been about a year since you've embarked on this partnership. Have you changed the goals, course corrected them in any way since you started having this conversation, Kirt?
No. I think that when you get into a partnership, either with a larger incumbent or a smaller company, obviously as a startup you have to remain focused on what your objectives are. In our case, building differentiation, creating platform richness. We're really focused on those two things, and Microsoft helps us with one of those things really well. So that hasn't changed. Yeah.
So there's a bias here on this stage about partnerships that have worked really well. Your history, obviously, Peggy at Microsoft, and even before that, and Kirt, the partnership thus far obviously seems like a fantastic one. But when you think about like how partnerships can go bad, again, without necessarily naming names, but drawing from those experiences, Peggy, what are some of the lessons that you've learned on, things to avoid that can lead partnerships down the wrong path?
Well, the biggest lesson I think that we've learned is you always have to do your homework and be very respectful of the other side. And in my previous role, years ago, the first time we went into China, we had a situation where we just didn't handle it very well. We didn't understand, first of all, the culture very well. We didn't understand the objective of the partner very well. And we probably did everything wrong that you could do wrong, and ended up not doing business in China for a few years until we regrouped, just got a better perspective of the industry, a healthy respect for the other side of the table, understood where they wanted to go, and then re-entered the market, and things ended in a much better place. But you do have to do your homework. You can't take that for granted, and make sure you understand where the other side's coming from before you try and step into a partnership.
And so I guess there's a long gestation period normally before you get into one of these things.
A little bit.
They tend not to happen suddenly.
Yeah, you want to make sure that, again, because you're giving up a little control, you want to make sure you're giving it up to the right party. Well, for both sides, really.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. We're about out of time, and appreciate you all sitting in and enjoying this with us. Thanks.
Thanks, Mood.